Question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree that the Scottish Government needs to reset its relationship with business?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has a duty to have a good, constructive working relationship with all sectors of Scottish society. That very much includes the business community. This has been a really difficult period for the business community. I personally, and to an even greater extent my ministers, have engaged with business organisations and with different sectors of our economy over the course of the pandemic. But yes, very much I took part in business discussions over the course of the election campaign and absolutely gave the commitment that if there is a need to, whatever language you want to use, reset, restart, make sure we are focusing on all the key issues, then as First Minister, of course, I'm not just willing to do that, I'm very keen to do that.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, because it's not just myself or the Scottish Conservatives or others that are calling for this reset, it's the Scottish Chamber of Commerce. They said last month that a reset was necessary, but it hasn't happened. 6 weeks after it was promised, taxi drivers are still waiting on the second £1,500 payment. Businesses in Glasgow have had their plans upturned at 48 hours' notice. The Federation of Small Businesses called that the latest in the line of miscommunications around unlocking that have had serious consequences. The Scottish Hospitality Group are now warning more businesses will go bust unless they're given more help, and that they can't continue with this loss and uncertainty. Yesterday, the First Minister said in this chamber, and I quote, that she would work with the business sector to provide as much clarity and support as possible. So in that spirit, will she set out what specific progress is necessary to ease restrictions in Glasgow? And crucially, what further support will be provided to protect businesses right now?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in relation to the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, they, as I understand it, were engaged in a call with the Deputy First Minister in his new capacity as overseeing COVID recovery. I think earlier this week I've had a number of calls over the course of the pandemic with them myself, and that engagement will continue. I understand the frustration of the business community, just as I understand the frustration of every single citizen across the country as we continue to grapple with a global pandemic of an infectious virus. And in the past few weeks, as we were making very good progress, of course, being confronted with another new variant of this virus. Unfortunately, with the best will in the world, I cannot take away all of the impacts of a virus of this nature, but we work as hard as we can and we work as closely as we can to give as much notice and detail of our response as possible. But sometimes, I'm afraid, in the interests of health and human life, it is necessary for people in leadership positions like me to take very quick decisions, because as we know from bitter experience over this pandemic, it's often the failure to take quick and firm decisions that leads to loss of life. And anybody who is in any doubt about that only had to listen to a fraction of what Dominic Cummings outlined about what he described as the chaotic response of the UK government at key moments of this pandemic. So I will continue to try to take difficult decisions as well as I possibly can. On the specific issues of business support, there is a range of different support streams in place for business. They will remain in place for as long as is necessary. And of course, we will continue to discuss with different sectors of the economy what more support we can give. In terms of getting Glasgow back on track, we want to do that as quickly as possible, but that's got to be done responsibly and safely. In terms of today's numbers, I can tell the Chamber that there were 464 positive cases identified yesterday, 1.8% of all tests being positive. We see a reduction in hospital cases today and a small reduction in ICU cases. So there are reasons to be optimistic there, but we've got to continue in the interest of business and in the interest of everybody to take careful and cautious decisions to get the whole country back to normality.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister answered a question about restrictions in Glasgow and more support for businesses affected there by referencing Dominic Cummings. I'm sure there will be plenty of time from your backbencher scripted questions to answer about Dominic Cummings. I want to focus what is happening in Scotland's largest city and the impact that is having on businesses in our communities. Because Glasgow has been under COVID restrictions now for 269 days. 269 days where businesses have been struggling to survive. The Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, Stuart Patrick, said yesterday that funding grants fall far short. He said 90% of businesses will get less than they were promised. And this is a direct quote from him. The financial support offered bears no relationship to the economic damage now being done by restrictions. So does the First Minister agree with the Chief Executive of the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce? And what will she do to now deliver on the promises she and her government made to those businesses?
First Minister.
Well, I would say to Douglas Ross that the point I was making in my earlier answer was about the importance of careful, cautious, responsible decision-making in the face of a deadly virus. And I was also pointing out, with reference to some of what we heard yesterday, what the impact and implications can be if a leader does not take careful, cautious and responsible decisions. And I think most people across the country understand the seriousness of the point that I am making. Why is that relevant and not deflective? Because we are still in the face of this pandemic, and it remains important that we take those careful decisions. To Douglas Ross, I know how long the City of Glasgow has been under restrictions because, unlike him, I am a resident of the City of Glasgow. So these restrictions apply to me just as they apply to others. I know how difficult it is for residents and businesses across Glasgow, but I also know how dangerous it would be if we eased restrictions too quickly and allowed a new variant of this virus that we know is spreading perhaps even more quickly than the variant at the start of the year to take a grip again. That's why there are the public health interventions underway across Glasgow right now, surge testing, accelerated vaccination. I said earlier in the week, we see cautious signs for optimism that that is working, and we will continue to monitor that very carefully. And yes, we will continue to discuss with businesses how, in the face of this difficult situation, we support them to the best of our ability and to the best of the resources we have at our disposal. But however frustrating I know it is for business, the worst thing somebody in my position could do for businesses and for individuals is to act in a way that allowed this virus to take over again, because that would lead to more businesses being closed and it would lead to more lives being lost. So we need to continue to steer a careful course through this, and difficult though I know this is for everyone, that is what I will seek to do.
Douglas Ross.
The Minister does know Glasgow. She answered her question about knowing the numbers of Glasgow, but she completely ignored the point from the Glasgow Chambers of Commerce, their Chief Executive, who is saying 90% of businesses will get less than was promised by the First Minister and the Scottish Government. So this Government's approach to business does need a reset. But more than that, it needs a complete overhaul. Businesses don't see anyone around the Scottish Government table who's fighting their corner. Even one of the First Minister's own economic advisers has said that her government is anti-business. But one of the First Minister's own advisers. But instead of business people who understand how to create jobs, it's the Greens who might get a seat around the First Minister's table. A Green party that doesn't even believe in economic growth, a Green party that ignores business unless they want to celebrate at a high-end bar in George Street, and a Green party that wants to risk the entire oil and gas industry and the tens of thousands of jobs it supports. This government, this SNP government, does need to reset its relationship with business. Does the First Minister honestly believe a coalition with the Greens is the way to do that?
First Minister.
I think most people across the country, and actually most responsible businesses that I speak to and have interaction with, know that yes, it is important to support a strong, vibrant, sustainable economy, but it is also vital, in fact, it is a moral imperative to do that in a way that meets our obligations to the planet and delivers our climate change targets. And from that last question, I'm not sure that the climate is particularly high up the agenda of Douglas Ross. So we will continue to make sure that we support industry, that we support the economy, but that we also support the country to move to net zero, which is a key priority and should be a key priority for all of us. In terms of the questions about the Glasgow business community, the Glasgow Chambers of Commerce, I believe Stuart Patrick himself was on a call with the Deputy First Minister and the Finance and Economy Secretary on Tuesday of this week. I'm sure the issues that have been raised, I would expect and assume the issues that have been raised here today were raised on that call, and the Scottish Government will be taking them seriously and working with the business community to address them. That's how we operate as a government. We are always looking for ways in which we can improve engagement and responsiveness, and we will continue to do that. But I come back to the central point here, Presiding Officer. This country, like much of the world right now, is in the grip of a global pandemic. It has taken too many lives already, and it has the capacity and potential, if we don't get the decisions right, to take more lives in future. This is very difficult for everybody, businesses and individuals. My responsibility, and I'm not complaining about this, it's what I'm elected to do, my responsibility is to try to take those difficult decisions in the best way possible to get the country through this as safely as possible. And that's a responsibility I will continue to treat with the utmost seriousness.